Environmental racism is the condition, is the problem of disproportionate exposure of Indigenous communities, Black communities, other communities of color to environmental burdens, to pollutants and contaminants. But it's also about the slow response by government, right, to address these issues. What we know is that where you live has bearing on your well-being. In Canada, your postal code determines your health. So we know that certain communities are less healthy because of where they live. Most African Nova Scotians live in historical African Nova Scotian communities, which are rural communities, and many of them are near landfills. And we know Indigenous communities as well are the ones that tend to be disproportionately located near to these hazardous sites. When you're living in out-of-the-way, invisible communities that often lack a voice, that are invisible to government, then often your voice isn't heard. You have to look at environmental racism within the context of the history of Nova Scotia, within the context of colonialism in Nova Scotia and Canada. There is a reluctance, a hesitance in Canada to name racism. Racism embeds itself into all of our social structures, and in Canada we tend to steer clear of that. Racism and environmental racism have real impacts on the ground with respect to these particular communities. It has impacted Black and Indigenous communities socially, economically, and politically. When you look at particular communities as not being worthy, of having no humanity, of not being valuable, which is how we typically think of non-white peoples, then it makes sense in many ways that you're not going to respond in the similar way as you would with a white community, because these communities don't mean anything to you, to individuals. So I think there's a detachment. If you're not taking time to meet communities and get a sense of their priorities, their experiences, their challenges will never get written into environmental policy. It requires that you listen to these communities, and that's typically what's not happening.